In previous modules, we've talked about the internet and what is the World Wide Web. We've talked about how data is transmitted between a server and a browser and how the browser is responsible for showing that content to the end user. Now let's take a slight detour and look at how do we manage a web project. Obviously, in this class, we are looking for how do we do things like build websites, and we need to have a good organizational structure to understand that process and make it easier to work with. There's an old saying, people don't plan to fail, they fail to plan. And in failing to plan, it's often easy to fail our project or to make it more difficult. What I would like to do is give you some insights based upon my personal experience as a professional web developer and as an instructor to show you things that I've learned that work and don't work and some common issues that we might have. The first thing I want to talk about is knowing your audience. Now you might think, well, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, very simply, if you think about all the different websites that are out there on the internet, there is everything from people who want to rent bounce houses to people who are looking to paint houses. There is everything from collectibles to sports to you name it, you can find it on the internet. Well, the people who are looking to rent a bounce house for their child's birthday party or maybe for a block party or something like that is going to be very different than necessarily the person who's looking for a pizza place that's nearby. You might think, well, wouldn't they go to Yelp or someplace like that to find a local pizza place? And you're correct, they very well might. But think about what they're going to be looking for. Now, there are certain things that most people are interested in, but there are some things that are going to be extremely different depending upon the context, even with the same person looking. You want to think about things like, how is the color I'm using influencing the design of my web project? Now, you might go, but I'm not a web designer, I'm more of a programmer, but still, there are some basic concepts that we can use that will make it easier for us to convey feeling. And we don't have to be a fully developed designer. Instead, we just need to know some basic concepts. Now, we'll talk about some of those later on in future modules. And the key thing that we want to make sure we do, even before we start thinking about what color we're going to use or what images are we going to use or anything like that, is what information are they looking for? The person who just got a diagnosis from a doctor is going to be looking up information about that diagnosis that they might not have gotten because the doctor only spent 2 or 3 minutes with them, and they're looking for something entirely different than the person who's looking to order from Amazon or Walmart or some other place like that online. In the case of looking from a doctor, you're going to be looking for lots of information, and you want stuff that's going to be easy for you to understand, but it's going to be from a credible source. On the other hand, if you're ordering something from like Amazon or Walmart or some other place online, then maybe you're looking for reviews and maybe price comparison or alternative products, or is there something that usually is bought with that product because it's a common add-on or it's a needed add-on to the product? So think about how people are going to be looking at your content and start thinking about, okay, what do I need to collect? What do I need to gather? What do I need to put forward to be successful with this? Now, one of the things that I do recommend when I talk to people is I recommend that they have a singular focus to their website. And more importantly, each page be even more focused. So let's say I was building a website for a political campaign. Well, I don't want to put every belief I have in the donate page and the history page of my candidate all together on one page, just kind of jumbled up together. Instead, I want to look at it and say, okay, the whole website is going to be about the campaign for candidate X. It's not going to include getting people to try to go to their store and buy things online. It's not going to include a beef that they might have had with a former employer. It's not going to include any of that type of stuff. No, it's going to be focused on the candidacy of that person. Then each page is going to have separate things. Each item about that separate page is going to point back to and be part of the larger idea of the candidacy for that candidate. So you might have one page that has information about that person and community, how long they've lived there, those types of things. You might have another page that is endorsements. Who's the local people who are endorsing your candidate for their position? You might have another page that is positions. And you might even, for complex positions, have subpages for that. And those subpages, of course, point back to the idea of the positions of the candidate, which is, once again, all about the candidacy of that candidate. And so you can see how you can start to build out multiple pages, all designed around a single topic or theme. And then the overall website is about a broader but still consistent theme. If you look at websites, you go to a news website like CNN, you'll notice how this all works. So you go to their homepage, they have all their popular stories and opinion pieces and things like that. You can then have subsections, and it might be a section on sports or lifestyle or national politics or world politics and those types of things. And they'll link you to other stories, but it's all grouped around the same basic idea. And it's all encompassing the idea of the news. If you go to Amazon, you'll see similar things and how you can group things into different categories. Is this electronics, or is this clothing? Is this jewelry, or is this, home improvement? And then it has items underneath it. And so organizing your information is very important, and organizing it based upon what the audience is expecting and what they're looking for is going to be very important. Now, a professional web developer will probably be developing multiple websites. Over my career, I have developed over 100 websites. And depending upon who you are, you might think, well, that's a lot, or that's not hardly anything. The number of websites that you do or don't develop is heavily based upon the context. Is this a full-time job? Is this a large website that takes a lot of time managing the resources for? Or are they a bunch of small little websites? Do you do this as a side job, or what we now refer to as a side hustle, or are you doing this full-time? When I worked in industry for a single company, I was maintaining about 16 websites. Now, some of those were test and development websites. Some of those were what we refer to as production websites that were public-facing. That limited me in scope based upon how many websites they needed to have. They were all for the same company. Each website was around a specific niche of the company and what it was doing. Now, some of these websites were internal facing, such as internal employee training or the internal help desk. Others were customer facing, such as we also did customer training, and we also had a customer help desk and support system that we used. Some of them were merely informational. Some of them, like I said, were for testing and development purposes. I worked for that company for approximately a dozen years, and so 16 websites in a dozen years might not seem like a lot, but they were very large websites, and they were constantly being updated and changed based upon the needs of the company. In other cases, I worked as a freelancer, developing websites for customers that I've gone out there and I've found. And in some of those cases, those websites were very small and only took a couple of weeks to put together. So it really varies. No matter how big or how small my websites were that I was developing, though, I found that organization is very important. With the way that computers have been developed, however, I've noticed that the organization of our files has become quite different than when I started. When I started working with computers, you had to know where every file was located, and you had to know how to organize that information. However, now on Windows, you have your search feature. We're used to using search on websites like Google and Amazon. And so we don't think anything about where our files go. And that's going to lead to the first mistake that I'm going to point out to you when you're designing for a web project. And that is, you need to keep all your files in a central location. Not only that, you want to have a folder for each individual project. So in this class, let's say you work on 3 different projects. Well, I would want to have 3 different folders. Well, you might have other projects in other classes. So how do you keep track of that? Well, what I did as a student is I created a folder for the year, and then I had a folder for the semester. So I might have my year, and then I'd have a fall semester, and then I have a folder for my class. And you might go, well, that's creating a lot of folders. Yes, but it allowed me to find my files very quickly. I simply went to My Documents, or now it's called Documents, and it was very easy to find. When I started creating web projects, I did the same thing. I built a folder under Documents called Websites. And under Websites, I created a separate folder for each individual project I was working on. Now that I've developed over 100 different websites, I've changed my process just a little bit. In fact, I have 2 folders under my Websites folder. And they are simply active and inactive. And you might think, well, why is that? Well, my active folders are the projects I'm currently working on. And so underneath active, I might have 2 or 3 websites, and they each get their own folder. When I'm done developing it, that company no longer needs my services, then they get moved into inactive. I can still go back and get to the files if I need to, or if they come back, and I've had this happen a year, 2 years later, they need some changes, I move them back in my active folder, I make those changes, I upload them to the server, and then I put them in my inactive folder. This makes it easier for me to find my active projects, and it's not uncommon for me to have anywhere between 3 and 7 active projects going on. So being able to be efficient in finding things, those 3 to 5, 7 maybe active projects out of a list of 100, makes it very important for me to have that organization. That's why I recommended having folders for the year, the semester, and then the class for you. Yes, it requires a couple extra clicks, but it's very easy to be organized. This is especially true if you have maybe 2 classes that might have a similar project that you have to do. Or maybe you had to retake a class. You want to make sure that you're using the correct assignment that you want to submit, because you don't want to submit the old assignment for the reason why you had to retake that class. And what I've seen on more than one occasion is a student will bring in their laptop and they have 3 or 4 files that are working on our project, and all of them are named the same thing. Now, the problem is they all have that page 1, or they have that index.html, or they have that whatever file it is they're looking for. And now they have to go through and figure out, okay, which one is the one I'm looking for? Is it the one that's on my desktop? Is it the one in Documents? Is it the one on my thumb drive? Is it the one on my OneDrive? Is it the one on my Google Drive? And I have more than one time seen people do the same work 2, 3, or even 4 times because they didn't realize they had the files in the wrong place that they were editing. Or worse yet, they go and they're making changes and then they're viewing a different file on their browser. So they make changes and nothing happens. They make changes and nothing happens, and they get very frustrated about it. I had a student one time, they did this for over an hour and a half, and it wasn't until the last 5 minutes of class that they came to me and they said, why isn't this working? And I was very quickly able to find that problem and help them fix it. But if they had had a good organizational structure early on, they could have saved themselves an hour and a half of frustration. So when you're working on a web project for a class or maybe for a client, I recommend a couple of quick things. Number 1, have that good organization. If you're dealing with a class, have it so it's in a class folder. Maybe each assignment, especially for something like a web project where you can have multiple files, they have their own separate subfolder. That way you don't step on old projects. Number 2, make sure you only have one working set of files. That is the files that you actively work on. And this could be in your Documents folder under a Websites, and then you have one for your client, or maybe for your class and your project. Whatever it is, only work from one location. It's very common, like I said before, you have someone, they're working on a thumb drive, they're working on their laptop, maybe they copy files to a lab computer, and they don't know what the most recent version is. It gets very, very frustrating. Tell yourself, I'm only going to work on files from the documents folder, and then you're going to stay to it. And how do you do that? Well, I told students what I would do is I unplug my thumb drive. They go, why? I says, well, then I can't be working off my thumb drive. And they go, oh yeah, I guess that does make sense. Okay? Us older people, we like to think of it as experienced people, have learned the hard way. And so I tell you, make sure you work from only one source and one location. It's because of my experience that I've seen, both personally experienced as well as the experiences I've seen with other students. So determine where is your working file set going to be and then use it. The second thing I recommend is make sure you have backups. Backups are very important in any type of computer field, regardless of whether you're an IT professional, a programmer, or just using the computer as an end user. Always, always, always have a backup. That thumb drive is a great place to use as a backup. And it doesn't have to be a thumb drive. You might store it to your Google Drive, your Microsoft OneDrive. You might store it on some other media. But always have a backup that's not on the same media device, such as your laptop. Why do I say this? Well, in my years of teaching, I've experienced a lot of heartbreak from my students. This can include things like having their laptop stolen. Yes, I've had that happen before. Having their laptop break because of some malfunction, either age or accident, such as pouring a drink inside the laptop. Now, clearly, they didn't mean to do that. They were there working on their homework assignment, and their kid wanted to play ball. They said, "Dad, catch," tossed the ball to him, and the kid, being a young child, their accuracy wasn't perfect, and Dad was busy working, not realizing that a ball was about to get thrown at their head. Unfortunately, the ball missed, hit a glass of tea. The sweet tea dumped into the laptop, and the laptop was toast. I've seen and personally have had happen to me where I had a thumb drive that fell off, and it fell, and I'm a relatively tall guy, and so when it hit the hard floor, it cracked the printed circuit board inside and made that thumb drive worthless. I've seen CDs scratched. I've seen floppy disks and CDs chewed on by dogs. You name it, I have seen it. And no matter where you store your files, it can get lost. What I recommend is work from your working set, and then before you finish for the day, close out of your application, plug in your thumb drive, plug in your external hard drive, log into your online drive, whatever it is, copy the files, and now you have your backup copy. If you're working in two locations, such as a computer lab for class, and then you have a home computer, then what you do is you get done working on it, you copy it to that external source, you get to your new location, let's say home, you copy it from the external source into the working location on that computer, unplug your device, work on the files. When you're done, you copy it back to the device. Does this take a couple of steps? Yes. Is it worthwhile? Yes. Now you might say, well, I have an online drive. Why don't I just work from there? Works great until your drive gets locked out for some reason. And yes, I have also seen that. So I have seen lots of ways to try to be just a little bit more efficient and save yourself 5 seconds or 10 seconds. And I totally get that. All software developers and computer scientists, especially by our nature, are looking to be as efficient as possible. But backups are where you want to spend that little bit extra time to save your project just in case. The next step I'm going to recommend is organizing your files. And I already talked about having project files and things like that. But inside your file, when you start thinking about your audience, remember we talked about think about your audience and what your website's going to be. Start thinking about what types of information they want. Do they want lots of images, or do they want text, or do they want a combination? I'll give you a hint. As a minimum, they want a combination. Okay? People are very visual oriented, and so unless you are working with an audience that you know is going to be visually impaired, you want to make sure you have images inside your project. So with those images and maybe video files and other things, you want to start thinking about, like, how can I organize and put those into locations? I worked on one web project that had over 120 images in it. It was a large website, had about 80, 90 pages total. And so what did I do? Well, I created a subfolder for my images, and I thought I'd be perfect that way until I hit about 70, 80 images, and then I was trying to find where that image is. And I wound up saying, you know what? I need to better organize this. And so I created subfolders for my images as well. And as I created more and more subfolders, each folder sometimes only had 2 or 3 images. Sometimes they had 20 or 30 images. But I was organized and made it so I could find my files much faster. That made, when I want to put an image into my web page, it made it faster. And so I want to start thinking about, how do I want to organize? Do I want to have such things as a subfolder for just my regular pages? You can do that. There's a lot of reasons for. Organization is one of them. Another is search engine optimization. And we'll talk about search engine optimization in later modules, but grouping information is very important to search engines. And so whether it makes your life easier, the life of your end user easier, or even a search engine, you want to think about, how can I organize things to be as efficient and as effective as possible?